Nissan. It could move out tomorrow if they want, under the freedom of movement of capital. That's the reason why we should be opposing anything other than total withdrawal from the European Union. Now, how many people are under the misapprehension that our railway system has been privatised and is now owned by entrepreneurs of the capitalist class? I've got no doubt it'll be a lot. Well, I'll give you a few surprises. 70% of the United Kingdom railways are now owned by foreign nationalised companies. Just listen to them. Italy, National Rail, operates C2C RMT, I've revealed. There's a few more. The Caledonian Sleeper is actually owned by an entrepreneur in the UK. Chiltern Arriva, that's owned by Deutsche Bahn, the German nationalised state railways. Just imagine a nationalised company owning a private company in Britain. Cross country, German state railways. Docklands Light Railway, French nationalised railways. Essex Thameside, Italian state railways. East Midlands, Stagecoach, private. You know who that is? Virgin East Coast. That went as a result of it being nationalised, developed with our money, and then handed over to Branson. Gatwick Express, owned by the French National Railway Company. Grand Central, owned by the German State Railway Company. Greater Anglia, Dutch Railway nationalised company. Merseyside Rail, owned by the Dutch. Eurostar, that's a real beauty. I don't know how many people have been on it, but if you have, you'll have the luxury of knowing that 5% of it is owned by the State Railway Company of Belgium, and that 55% of it is owned by the French nationalised company, and the rest is owned by private entrepreneurs in Britain, because this stupid lot in Britain sold it off when it was making between £7 and £10 million profit each year. The Heathrow Express is owned by a consortium owned by the sovereign wealth funds of Singapore, China and Qatar. Heathrow Connect, same company. It's owned by Singapore, China and Qatar. That's what's happening as a result, yes, of us being in the European Union. The European Union is a disaster from start to finish. The Customs Union is a union which sets a tariff that if you do a deal with any other country outside the European Union, you've got to pay a state subsidy to the European Union. In other words, if you could get a product, say from America, far cheaper than you can get it from a European country within the European Union, you're not allowed to do it. And yet they claim that they're opposed to import controls. Well, we had import controls from 1945 to 1970 without a problem. Any country in the world that produced by giving a state subsidy and then attempted to import it into Britain at a cheap price were charged an import control. For those who worked in the coal mining industry, I'll tell you how it worked. We would produce coal in Britain at £15 a tonne. We had coal companies in different parts of the world producing coal at £25 a tonne. Now, if I've got that right, that's more than £15. But they were selling it here at £12 a tonne. How's that possible? Even the late Paul Daniels couldn't have pulled that one off. The reason is they were giving a state subsidy. But at least the governments, even the Tory government, imposed an import control. So the £12 tonne of coal coming in was costing £27 if they wanted it to come in. No wonder imports didn't come in. It was a protection policy that was common sense. Who first said it? Well, Karl Marx for one, but Mahatma Gandhi for another. Gandhi said we should have homespun. We should make and develop all those facilities that are ours. Why is it that we don't produce our own cotton? Why is it we don't produce our own wool? We have the finest cotton mills in Lancashire, the finest woolen mills in Yorkshire, the finest car development in the Midlands, and all have gone. Today, the 80% that we had in manufacturing is now 10%. 10% of our economy. That's where the problem lies. And now we're being told, after the vote of the British people, and it was a vote of the British people, the highest vote ever recorded, a majority of way over 1 million, and they call it insignificant. Christ, they've been elected for years on a minority vote. We have a government in power at the moment on 30.45% of the vote. 30% telling us what to do. They even, without regulations from the EU, say that a ballot for industrial action by a trade union has got to involve 50%, otherwise it's not legal. Secondly, if you get 55% of the vote, that's not the end of the story. There's a second clause. If only 55% have voted, you've got to have 40% of the entire workforce taken into account. So the total vote added together has got to produce an overall majority, including the 40% that didn't vote. Just imagine. Can't we have the same thing then in a general election for all those people, the 30 to 35% who didn't vote? Let's count them. And by the way, which party do we vote for? Who do they vote for? But we're being operated on the basis of a minority government telling us that we've got to have a minority, not in the side there in their way, but a majority, and a majority that is producing a double whammy. Quite frankly, it stinks to high heaven. Today, they're debating in Parliament Brexit. They're developing a programme of how we can get out within 2 years of the European Union. Why? I say that we can leave the European Union tonight without paying a penny to anybody, and under the law we're entitled to withdraw. I've got here a lawyer of the highest quality with 4 doctorates, who is an expert, the expert on European law. This is what she says. All that you require to trigger Article 50 is to say we're coming out of Europe. End of story. No more, no less. However, if you decide to implement Article 50, subsection 2, it triggers the Article 50 in such a way that the United Kingdom government have to accept that the EU will decide the policies and the principles that will apply for the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union. So why the hell is the Labour Party leadership mucking about with it? Why doesn't the leader of the party, a long-life friend of mine by the way, why aren't they simply saying we are going to trigger Article 50 and we're out of the European Union tomorrow? The only people who will suffer are the European Union. I'll give you a statistic. In our trading arrangement with Europe, we are in deficit to the tune each year of 80 billion. In our trading with the rest of the world, including Australia, New Zealand, America, and other countries, we're 40 billion in surplus. It doesn't take a genius to work out that the one that produces the surplus is better than the one that produces a deficit. The ones who suffer are the ones who are now exporting to Britain the products that we formerly produced. Like Volkswagen were producing all the cars that we used to produce here in the Midlands. So I say Article 50 should be triggered with no 2-year deals, 3-year deals or 10-year deals, and we should be able to negotiate a deal, a market deal with anybody. There's nothing peculiar about it. If someone wants to sell us a product in exchange for what we've got, let's do it. I'll tell you what it would mean if we did that immediately. It would mean that our fishermen could fish in their own waters for the first time since we joined the European Union. By the way, the free movement of labour and capital, the customs union, and of course the single market, which is a nonsense, were only introduced after the treaties of Maastricht and above all the Treaty of Lisbon. And the way that they switched the vote in Ireland was a simple one. It's the oldest trick in the book. They said if you'll accept it, we'll let you stay on the European Union Council with a delegate. And it switched the vote with the pressing for a different solution. But quite honestly, membership of the European Union on an ongoing basis, because that is what's happening, will be a disaster for Britain. We were better off than we were, but not in the way that we ought to be. And that's the principal issue at stake here. What we need to see is a development of trade with the rest of the world. When they ask me, who will we trade with? I'll tell you. We would trade with Australia, as we used to do, New Zealand, Africa, China, all the countries in Southeast Asia, all the countries, yes, in Latin America. Why not Cuba? Why can't we start and import Cuban coffee? Well, you know, we drink it, why not import it? I had a debate not long ago with somebody from the environmental movement, and she was screaming about CO2 emissions. We should ban them. I said, could you explain, I said to the listeners, why you're drinking CO2? She said, what are you talking about? I said, you've got a bottle of sparkling water. I said, it's sparkling because it's carbonated with CO2. She blinked. She couldn't comment on that one. It was a bit beyond her. In other words, the same environmental movement that today oppose the coal industry in Britain and are making us develop a nuclear power station that's going to cost billions at Hinkley Point. I mean billions, and the price to you is going to be 2.5 times what your electricity bill would be. That's the price of the electricity produced by nuclear power, with all its attendant dangers. Well, at least the Japanese have told him to Fukushima as a result of the disaster there. And of course the Ukrainians and Russia are having to build a concrete dome from 1976, the second time over the disaster at Chernobyl. And I know a bit about it. I was on the commission from the TUC. It was a massive disaster that could have eliminated probably half of Europe. No need for it. We've got all the facilities we need here in Britain to produce all the commodities we used to do, provided there's a willingness to do it. I'll tell you what will happen when you start to set budgets which are in the interests of people. I was in Ireland at the very point last year when the general election in Ireland, North and South, was announced. I was in the Republic. By the way, Sinn Féin lost 2 seats. They lost them to anti-European candidates who were anti-austerity. That should have been a signal to them. And I will be speaking next week in Ireland, and I will be telling Sinn Féin what you're doing and what you've said and what you're going to do is in fact a betrayal of all that the Irish people have fought for 800 years. The independence of Ireland. Why the hell are you now supporting a policy of tying yourself to an unelected body in New Brussels? It doesn't make sense. James Connolly would have gone mad. People like Larkin would never have tolerated it, that have turned the Citizens' Army out in 1913 against that concept. In other words, they interfered. The day after that election, the front pages of all the newspapers said this: we note the election in the Republic, but we are very concerned that the government is going to abolish water charges, and we now urge they reverse that policy. We are also very concerned that they are going to abolish council tax. We oppose that policy and will be pressing our Irish colleagues to reverse their policy. Within 24 hours of a government being elected democratically, the European unelected body are telling this lot that they've got to change the policies which has just won them the general election. And of course here in Britain, what we do, when the people have spoken, we allow somebody to go to the Supreme Court. Well, first of all the Appeal Court and then the Supreme Court. We've got 12 judges sitting there. I think there were actually 11. One was absent without leave. They're sitting there pontificating about what's right and what's wrong. Well, I'll tell you the first thing we ought to do, we should say we're going to, in future, elect our bloody judges and subject them to 5-year elections. How can our peers tell us how to elect in the unions but not elect themselves? In other words, we should have a policy where they're subject to re-election. It may well be that we get rid of the Oxbridge gang that consistently come down on the side of the capitalist class and against those who represent working people. And they have done for years. And the miners' strike, it's well known now. It at last is creeping through. The English High Court declared the strike unlawful. By the way, it was totally lawful. The Scottish High Court, of similar standing, declared it was lawful. They went to Ireland to try and recover the money that belonged to the NUM. I said, recover. I said, steal. They appointed a receiver and a sequestrator who marched over to Ireland. And they said to the Irish judges, the money you have in this bank, in the Bank of Ireland, belongs to the receiver in Britain. And the judge said, well, we've looked at the papers and it would appear to me that it says it belongs to the National Union of Mine Workers. They put it in the bank. They said, but it's been taken over since then. He said, not in my court it hasn't. And he wouldn't give him permission. He said, may I add by way of an addendum that I'm going to grant the National Union of Mine Workers, he said, a sum of money in order to operate their affairs day by day for the next couple of months while you make up your mind. And secondly, I feel that it's only appropriate that the money in Ireland remains in Ireland frozen until all of this lot's been sorted out. Boom, end of court case. At least we got some justice over there, as indeed we did in Luxembourg. So, you know, there can be changes, but within a European Union, quite frankly, there's nothing. But the important thing now is we should have been pressing and we should still press for the fact that people in the Labour Party and the Labour Party leadership should stop waffling. They should come out and say we should leave the European Union now. It's ironic, isn't it, that Theresa May, but apparently Corbyn won't say we're coming out. Well, she has. She says if she doesn't get access to the single market, that's the end, we're coming out. Well, if they demand some money back, I would tell them to take a running jump, because they've had enough money from this country over the past 40 years to owe us millions, if not billions of pounds. Now, I come to the vote inside Parliament, and I'm not going to be critical. What do we do with those members of Parliament who say, I've got a conscience? Well, I'm sick and tired of listening to the argument that the Labour Party is a broke church. The trouble with a broke church is there's too many non-believers in it.
That's right.
And quite frankly, if you join a political party, you abide by its constitution. And Jeremy Corbyn should say very clearly, if any member of Parliament votes against the party's policy, that we implement Article 50, even the one that I don't agree with, doesn't go far enough. But on that point alone, if he doesn't say, first of all, any minister is removed, he should also say, any member of Parliament who votes against will be deselected. That's the way that you deal with a political party. You can't have them all going in different directions. It's been a privilege to talk to you tonight. I've tried my best to explain the need, not only for withdrawal from the European Union, but to explain that we don't need to go through this nonsense of Article 50, Section 2, over a 2 or even longer period, and that we could simply leave tomorrow if necessary. Ironically, it's something that the Prime Minister has had to admit, that if she doesn't get her way with the single market, that she'll just simply pull out. Well, if that's the case, it proves that the law that I've read is also right. Yeah. So I'll leave you with this. As a socialist, I'm an internationalist. I want to get out of a European club that threatens the world through its NATO alliance, that spends billions on Trident submarines, and when they're fired, instead of firing them that way to the east, they fire them to Los Angeles. I mean, you know, what an indictment. 100 billion it's going to cost. And all we need for our health service is 20 billion. For our care for the elderly, 5 billion. Yeah. For our education system, 5 billion. To create jobs, 5 billion. And our policy would be giving every single citizen who was unable to get a job a guarantee that man or woman, whatever they're doing, will be guaranteed the national minimum wage, which, by the way, is £25,000 a year. We can do that in a simple stroke by getting rid of Trident and scrapping these submarines that don't always fire in the right direction. I'm trying to fire in a left direction. I hope you agree.
Thanks very much, Arthur. Just before we throw the meeting open to a question and answer session, I'd just like to pay tribute, obviously, to pay tribute to Arthur for the punishing schedule that he still subjects himself to, you know. And I'd like to thank him very much for that succinct and clear analysis as to why the SLP says get out of the EU and get out now. Paul will be passing among you in the not too distant future with a bucket, but I'd also like to pay tribute to Paul because Paul's organised this meeting in the face of family illness and stuff like that, and a caring role. So I think he's done a marvellous job really in organising this meeting. Those things that you're sitting on, by the way, not the chairs. Socialist Labour Party leaflet. Don't leave here without one. It's a fairly traditional colour for a party of the left. It's red, not red and yellow or anything like that. You know, it's red, and that gives the party's policy on a wide variety of issues. And with the SLP, we're not flip-floppers. We're not bankrolled by big business and commerce and this type of thing. Basically, it's a party that's bankrolled by its members. So do consider joining the SLP. And this leaflet lays out in a fairly easy to understand